I felt more alienated than ever as I stood in the center of the dining room during the family reunion. The location, the meal, and the travel expenses had all been covered by me. I even arranged the personalized t-shirts. On the front, the large lettering read "Biggest Disappointment." Everyone was wearing theirs, and I was no exception. I wasn't upset, even though I could feel the garment pressing against my chest. No, I didn't feel angry. A deeper sense of exhaustion permeated my bones. I felt as though I had dedicated my entire life to establishing my identity, only to find myself reduced to a mere joke. From the other side of the table, my sister Laura was already giggling about it and making fun of me. She hardly suppressed her laughter as she added, "It's just a joke, Frankie." Ben, my brother, joined in, grinning lazily as he held out his beer to me. "Dude, it's funny, come on." My folks? At first, they sat in silence. Then my mother gave an uneasy, nervous laugh. It was the type of giggle you make when you're awkward yet don't want to offend anyone. My dad simply grinned and shook his head, as he always did when he thought I had done something goofy. I mumbled, "Yeah, funny," as I folded the shirt neatly and put it aside, my hands shaking slightly. Even though I could feel their laughter and their derisive glances, I was unable to feel angry. I had paid for it all, after all. The location, the food was delicious, and the attire was perfectly coordinated. I was the one who made the joke. I used my card to create this humorous t-shirt, in the hopes that perhaps, just possibly, nostalgia would soften their hearts. I had rented the lakeside home they had once gushed about. Instead, they met me with mockery. The family still made fun of me. I got up and grinned once again, my heart heaving at the realization that had just hit me. I said, "I'll be right back," and went to my room upstairs. I dug into my purse and felt my hands shake a little, but no one noticed. I left it in the folder, weighty, thick, and crisp. I had everything planned. I prepared documents of great significance, printed on unique parchment. Remember them, they could retain them. But preserving a memory wasn't the point here. The objective was to convey the truth to them. I inhaled deeply and walked back to the dining room. I had nothing to say. I didn't want to make a giant speech. I entered, opened the folder, and started carefully and slowly tearing the sheets in two, one page at a time. At first, nobody noticed. They were too preoccupied with their own little world and too busy snapping selfies in their new clothes. "What is that?" Laura's eyes widened as she turned first, then scowled with uncertainty. "Was that an agreement?" he inquired. I didn't respond. My father was on the verge of speaking when he stood halfway up. I forced a grin as I placed the torn papers in front of my empty plate. I said, "Enjoy the shirts," and then I turned to leave the room. "Don't slam doors. Don't shout." The only sounds I hear are the creaking of the screen door and my footsteps on the worn wooden floor. I didn't even bring my jacket. I didn't require it. My phone began to buzz when I was halfway to the car. I received only one phone call, then another, then three more. I didn't respond yet. I haven't responded yet. The first thing I wanted them to read was what I had destroyed. Allow them to sense it. Allow them to realize their mistake. For 5 minutes, I sat quietly in the car and stared at my hands on the steering wheel. I felt as though I had already come to terms with it. I have disappointingly been a disappointment to the family. I anticipated what would happen. I sat in my car after the family gathering, still looking at my trembling hands on the steering wheel, my thoughts racing over everything that had just transpired. I wasn't as frustrated as I had anticipated. It wasn't an outburst of rage, a theatrical scene with loud arguments, or the revelation came slowly and painfully that I had been playing a game. They never wanted me to win, painfully. They failed to notice me. They didn't see the true me, the person I had worked so hard to become. They only saw the child who didn't meet their standards for success. I found myself reliving the events of that evening. My parents chuckled as if it were an inside joke, expecting me to nod and smile as usual. The worst part was not the words, nor the careless way they had called me a disappointment. When I was younger, I thought that their affection was just out of reach, and that I would eventually be able to join the family table if I worked hard enough and achieved the results they desired. However, I was wearing a t-shirt that made fun of me at the reunion that I had paid for, and I realized right then that they had already written me off. Since it was only a family get together, I didn't expect the reunion to go flawlessly, but I did want some appreciation and recognition for the work one had put into planning the entire event. I didn't make many requests, just saying thank you would have been enough. Rather, as usual, they all held fast to their responsibilities. Ben was a charming misfit who was always prepared with a joke, a young man who demonstrated unwavering integrity despite his flaws, and Laura was the cherished child who garnered the most attention for her daring exploits. Under the guise of amusement, I found myself relegated to the background and subjected to accusations of failure. But that was enough for me. I was unable to simply leave without saying anything. I had been the quiet one for years, letting their laughing and their attempts to teach me humility take precedence. It had been effective for a long time. I felt the pressure of their gaze on me as I left the table, but I had grown tired of it. I refused to remain silent and to allow them to continue to influence my story. Not now. This task was something I had planned. It has been on my mind for months. There was a part of me that thought I was doing this for the family and for us when I hired the space and paid for everything. I reasoned that if I made everything flawless, perhaps they would notice me this time. However, all I received was a joke. Wearing the biggest disappointment t-shirt made me feel horrible and embarrassed. To make them proud, I had been planning the reunion and covering the costs. And I get this response? I suppressed the frustration that had been building inside of me for years long enough to enter that guest room and retrieve the envelope I had concealed for the perfect opportunity. I had the necessary paperwork ready. They were notarized, and I notarized and signed them as proof of all the covert actions I had taken on their behalf, provided them with anonymous cash assistance. Every time they struggled, I took care of everything in secret. However, I never received any acknowledgement. Not once. I considered Ben my brother. Even though he had caused 2 automobile accidents by the time I was 17, he still received praise and more money to spend. Despite not doing the work, Laura received all the accolades. But me? I took chances, worked evenings, started my own business, learned to code on my own, and paid off my college loans without ever seeking assistance. I kept it a secret from them when my business took off. When I made my first 6-figure investment, I kept it a secret from them. I knew they wouldn't like it, so I said they'd say I was lucky or that they raised me right by twisting it, me right. I therefore walked with determination after leaving the table. Nobody anticipated it. Not even my parents had anticipated it. They had no idea what I was going to do. They were unaware of the gravity of the situation. Why should they be aware anyway? Their understanding of me was never complete. Not entirely. Never. After leaving the documents on the table, I turned to leave. I allowed the calls to come in while I was sitting in my car. I didn't respond at first. They would witness my actions. They would read my writing. I was determined to make things difficult for them. It was time for me to take charge of the narrative after they had spent years redefining my identity. The money wasn't the point. It had nothing to do with the presents or the praise. It was about me at last asserting my rights. Real power, not the type my parents had always tried to force on me, was something I had never experienced. The truth would be out, and they would finally know who I was, with or without their consent, and become. I didn't answer the calls, but they continued to come. They weren't quite ready yet. I wanted them to spend some time stewing in their seclusion. I was certain they would understand the consequences as soon as they read those materials. They would understand the consequences of my actions. They would know what it was like to be ignored, to be written off without a second thought. At least briefly. I didn't have to inform them. I was aware that they would attempt to justify it. In my mind, I could just hear my mother's voice, gentle and contrite, attempting to explain everything away as a simple misunderstanding. I could hear Ben's usual cynicism as he attempted to place the responsibility back on me. I was no longer concerned. I had given them opportunities to demonstrate their concern for years. I had been there for them in times of need. I had been there silently, behind the scenes. They were unaware of the debts I had assisted in paying down. Even when they didn't ask, I assisted them. They never acknowledged me. I wasn't even interested in it. I just wanted to be noticed. to be recognized. Only once. I now understand that I will not receive recognition from them. They were unable to recognize me for who I was, what I had accomplished, and how far I had come. They had already written me off as a disappointment and an outcast. They made fun of me with that t-shirt in front of everyone. It was not just a joke, it was a declaration. It was now my chance to reveal my true identity. On my way to the city, I traveled through the night. I didn't care that I didn't know exactly where I was heading. The quiet road was only filled with the sound of my tires on the asphalt and the streetlight's sporadic flashes. I felt at ease for the first time in years. My hands had stopped shaking. My heart was no longer racing. At last, I had power over my life. I had long tried to meet their expectations and be who they wanted. But now, I had reached my limit. I didn't bother turning on the lights when I got to my place. I headed straight to my prepared workstation. Once more, my phone buzzed. I received one message and one call. I received another message. However, I chose not to let it bother me. I got my laptop open and started typing. I wasn't composing a letter out of rage. I would rather not snap. I didn't have to. I had the truth, which was stronger than rage. I began typing the email to my lawyer, requesting that he timestamp the files I had previously supplied him. I had evidence. I had proof of everything. Then it dawned on me. I had constructed something. What I had made was something they could never take away. They believed they could dismiss me, but they were mistaken. No more. I took a big breath, sat back in my chair, and sent the email. For the first time ever, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath in anticipation of their acceptance. I no longer felt scared. I would rather not hear that I did well from them. I didn't need their validation. They weren't necessary for me. I was inundated with texts when I got up the following morning. They were more frantic now, yet they were the same ones who had arrived the previous evening. One came from Laura, who apologized for the t-shirt and attempted to clarify that it was merely a joke. Laura conveyed that I took things too seriously and maintained a light-hearted tone throughout. Ben also sent a message, accusing me of embarrassing everyone and ruining the family gathering. It didn't matter, though. The reality was already visible to me. Furthermore, it would be seen by more than just the family. Everyone was involved. All those who had previously dismissed me, perceiving me as a disappointment and a failure, were now involved. They were going to witness my transformation. I returned to my emails and wrote my lawyer one last note. It has nothing to do with the paperwork this time. It has to do with something more significant. I asked him to reach out to several journalists I knew personally. The actual narrative, my story, was going to be revealed to the world. There was no longer any need to pretend to be someone you're not. There was no need to alter the past. I could no longer conform to the expectations they had set for me. This time, I was taking control of my future. The article didn't become viral right away. It was only a whisper at first, a tiny rippling in the enormous sea of media. However, the ripple quickly became a wave. Slowly, my reality and narrative spread throughout blogs, social media, and even certain news sources. It was more than a piece of writing. It provided a glimpse into my life, the life they had deemed a failure and attempted to eradicate. And many realized the true story when they saw it. The success of my business was not the only topic covered in the essay. It wasn't merely a boast about my digital platform's success or six-figure investments. It went beyond simply mentioning how my business went viral or how I paid off all of my college loans at once. No, the piece went further. It clarified the years of unspoken financial support I had given to my family. I was always there, gently supporting them from the shadows, even when they feigned not to care. It brought to light the innumerable, unidentified contributions I made to settle their mortgages' money. I provided them with no expectation of anything in return. It talked about how I paid for Ben's failed business endeavors, how I covertly covered Laura's college tuition, and how I toiled diligently to ensure they didn't lose everything, all while they laughed at me. The piece explored the years I stayed silent, hoping for recognition that never came. It discussed the t-shirt they made, making fun of me and referring to me as their biggest disappointment. It wasn't a joke, though. It was a harsh reality. It served as a reminder of how others perceive me. However, They were surprised to discover something else in the piece. They never imagined it would happen. The story did not merely expose them, it outlined my strategy. It displayed the notarized letters I had drafted to ultimately gain control. These were not merely business contracts, they symbolized my declaration of independence. Those letters contained the money I had secretly been providing my parents over the years, the down payment for Laura's new home, and the retirement accounts I had established for them. During the family reunion, I shredded those documents in their presence. They believed these documents would never see the light of day. However, they did. Now everyone was aware. The responses grew as the story did. I observed the deluge of incoming messages, including emails, texts, and even phone calls. Initially, I only received congratulations. Despite the odds, friends, coworkers, and even some complete strangers acknowledged that I had succeeded and accomplished something noteworthy. However, the pushback followed, with my relatives attempting to steer the conversation. Laura was the first to message me. She was obviously upset. She accused me of humiliating them and spoiling everything. She claimed that I was ruining the family and embarrassing myself. Ben, with his typical self-righteousness, naturally intervened, telling me I was exaggerating and asking why I couldn't just let it go. He failed to understand. They didn't. My parents come next. I nearly laughed when my mom sent me a text message that was so well written and full of phony worry. She apologized. It was just a misunderstanding, she said. It was just a joke. I found it difficult to take seriously because I knew they would never admit their mistakes. None of them received a response from me. I didn't respond immediately. Rather, I sat back and observed their attempts to change the narrative. They attempted to portray it as though I was at fault and that I had overreacted. They wanted to hide what they had done, not merely apologize. They tried to change the tale to make themselves appear better, while I appeared to be the bad guy. However, I wasn't going to allow that to occur this time. The truth came out this time. The article contained the receipts. They were unable to retract that. Even if they attempted to twist it, they couldn't take back what I had done for them. The entire globe was observing. Each time they attempted to hide their traces or post another defense, more people were able to see through it. My vindication increased along with the story's popularity. The story wasn't just about me. It was about how families can control you and make you feel worthless, even after you give them everything. It was a story about standing up for yourself when you feel silenced for an extended period. However, more than just the general public began to pay attention. Even my closest relatives began to question the narrative they had heard. Those who had always told me to be quiet, stay out of the way, and never ask for anything were starting to speak up. Gradually, several family members reached out to me, expressing their empathy and acknowledging that they had noticed my unusual behavior. Naturally, they kept their support to themselves, but it felt like a lifeline. The money was no longer the only consideration. It had to do with the approval I had been longing for. It was about finally receiving recognition. It wasn't about what they could take from me, and I realized that for the first time, it was about my work, my earnings, and the now public truth. The first few days were a flurry of emotions as I sat back and let the world analyze the fallout from my actions. I felt some regret and some validation, but overall, I just felt like a giant weight had been lifted. It wasn't until now that I realized how much of myself I had hidden beneath the expectations of my family. Now that the truth was out, I was no longer hiding. Admiration, amazement, and a few frustrated remarks from others who simply didn't get it were the reactions to the piece. However, when I received a call from a journalist, the entire magnitude of the situation dawned on me. After reading the Forbes piece, she was keen to learn more about the personal side of the tale, so she found me. The details of the finances were no longer the only consideration. It dealt with the more profound suffering, the treatment I received from my family, and how I was able to escape their suffocating hold. After accepting the interview, I ended up sitting across from her on the day of the interview, reliving memories I had long suppressed. She asked me about my early years and the experience of constant disregard and undervaluation. I shared with her my futile attempts to win my parents' favor and the years I dedicated to attracting their attention. I said that I had been conditioned to think my worth depended on their approval, but the hardest lesson was that I could never win their love. The hardest part was remembering the first time I realized they weren't ignoring me. they pushed me away on purpose. Years of subtly conveyed and not so subtly conveyed signals culminated in the t-shirt incident at the family reunion. It all made sense to me when I saw the shirt that said biggest disappointment and realized they found it humorous. To them, I had only been a running joke. They were frustrated with me for not fitting the mold they had established for me, not merely because I was successful. As I spoke, the journalist's pen flew across the paper, and she nodded. The extent of the wounds was obvious to her. She asked me whether I had any regrets at the conclusion of the interview. I stopped, giving it some serious thought. No, I replied. I've regretted many things in my life, but this incident isn't one of them. It was time for me to stop pretending, to stop trying to fix something that wasn't going to be right. I had to let them go, and in doing so, I finally found the courage to be who I really am. After publishing the essay a few days later, I braced myself for the barrage of comments that ensued. However, I wasn't scared this time. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard, and the world became aware of my perspective. People started remarking on my courage and fortitude in leaving the toxic environment that had characterized my family. Some of their tales were similar. People reached out, sharing their personal tales of being the outlier in the family and experiencing rejection and underappreciation. My experience gave them the confidence to ultimately leave their own toxic situations, and many of them thanked me for speaking up. It was too much. It was no longer just about me. It was about all of us who had endured silence and words of inadequacy. However, the murmurs behind my back continued in spite of the encouragement. My family, of course, tried to alter the narrative. They continued to send me emails and texts, but this time they weren't apologizing. They were manipulating the situation to protect their reputation. In a lengthy reply, my mother claimed that I had misinterpreted everything and that their actions had only been motivated by love. Still resentful, Ben texted me to say that I was destroying the family. Laura wrote in a mysterious social media post about misunderstandings and how some people simply didn't value their possessions. I couldn't contain my laughter. One could sense the irony. In an attempt to portray themselves as the good guys, the same individuals who had dismissed me for years were now attempting to control the situation. The problem was that I no longer had to justify myself to them. I didn't have to justify what I had done. The truth was out there and would not go away. The universe was speaking for me despite my silence. They couldn't repair the harm. They had caused themselves with a few contrite texts or well-written posts. Their lies were now in the open because the truth had a way of revealing them. However, I was still not seeking retribution. I wasn't upset, at least not in the manner they had anticipated. I had moved on. For myself and no one else, I was creating something significant. My company, my life, and my future. It was liberating for me to know that I could leave them. I didn't approach. Silence greeted my family's attempts to communicate with me through shared acquaintances, and their few SMS messages remained unanswered. There was nothing more to say. I had made my decision, and they had made theirs. In a sense, I didn't want them, and I didn't need them. Now my life was mine. I made my own decisions. And I came to a realization when I at last stopped to see everything I had constructed. I was no longer merely getting by, I was doing well. And that felt like victory more than anything else. The weeks that ensued were a blur of fresh experiences, fresh perspectives, and a growing feeling of independence. I had separated myself from my family's destructive patterns, but it went beyond simply severing connections. It was about what I was creating for myself as much as for my business. I had often pondered what it would be like to stand alone without the weight of their expectations hanging over me, to be genuinely pleased with my accomplishments. I was starting to understand it for the first time. The more I concentrated on my work and expanding my company, the less I felt the need for their approval. I finally became aware of my worth after I stopped seeking validation from others. I launched a tech mentorship program, and it started to take off. Young people who had experienced disdain or neglect from their families were sharing their stories with me. Just like me, others told them they were unworthy and that they couldn't succeed alone. They were also trying to prove everyone wrong, just like me. I was building a future for myself and helping others build one that society had previously denied them. Every day seemed like a step forward. I began to observe my business's growth in terms of both money and reputation. More significantly, I was beginning to feel proud of what I was producing as people began to pay attention. The rumors of my history started to die down. My relatives continued to send me emails and messages, but I chose to ignore them. Now their words had no meaning. Their narrative became increasingly meaningless as they attempted to recast the story. It had nothing to do with me anymore, it was their guilt and shame. However, I still remember one particular instance that made me realize how far I had come. I was sitting in my office on a Saturday afternoon, going over some fresh company ideas. It buzzed on my phone, a message. It came from my sister Laura. She hadn't contacted me in weeks, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared to hear her out. After a moment of hesitation, I opened it. A brief, seemingly contrite reply read, "I see what you've done. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to react. I didn't think she would apologize after everything that had transpired. I had actually accepted the possibility that I might never hear the words I was hoping for." But there it was. There was a moment of vulnerability and a surge of remorse. I considered answering, even acknowledging the message, but then I had a thought. Waiting for excuses wasn't my life. The goal was not to win their approval. It was about moving on and living my life as it was, regardless of who saw it. I therefore didn't respond. I put my phone away and returned to my main focus, which had brought me peace. It had become central to my life. Moreover, I was living it according to my terms, irrespective of the sincerity of the words. Month after month went by, and my business kept growing. I had developed into a person I could be proud of and not feel guilty about when I looked in the mirror. I continued to think about the t-shirt, the family reunion, and the years I had spent attempting to gain a seat at their table. I had my table now, though. I am also deciding who I will let sit there. I would occasionally receive the same inquiries. I would be honest with them and ask, "How did you do it? How did you break free?" It had nothing to do with a big gesture. Making a scene or establishing a point wasn't the goal. It was about understanding that those who genuinely cared about me would never make me feel inadequate. The rest was irrelevant. I saw an old buddy at a conference a few months after the reunion. She wanted to catch up because she saw a media story about me. She informed me throughout our conversation that she had been keeping tabs on my development and had even told her friends about my situation. "You showed me that it's okay to stand up for myself, to stop waiting for other people's approval. I don't need to prove anything to anyone," she laughed. I realized then that I had changed something. I reminded others as well as myself that it's never too late to leave behind things that don't serve you to regain your value and authority. And that turned out to be the most exquisite present I could have ever given myself. It had nothing to do with drama, retaliation, or seeking revenge. More profoundly, it was about taking back my freedom to live genuinely, unapologetically, and above all, without the acceptance of those who never saw me for who I really was. I no longer feel resentment when I remember that t-shirt from that family get-together. I'm relieved. I felt powerful. I understood immediately that I didn't need their approval. I had all I required to create my own future. I had clarity the following morning as I sat on the side of the bed and watched the sun's golden rays peek through the curtains. For the first time in years, I woke up without that crushing weight in my chest. The morning's customary silence had changed. I felt no emptiness or doubt about whether life was meant to be this way. I had taken back my independence and control. When I came downstairs, my folks were sitting at the breakfast table. My dad was looking distractedly at the newspaper, as usual, while my mom was busy dishing the eggs. Something had changed inside of me, yet the house remained the same. A few days ago, I was a different person. However, it appeared that the dynamics inside the family had not altered in the slightest. They remained the same, blind to the reality I had at last discovered. They were unaware that I had just spent the night getting everything ready, including the paperwork, the email I sent to my lawyer, and the well-planned strategy. They had no idea that their actions would soon have consequences. They looked at each other awkwardly as I took a seat at the table. My mother grinned at me, presumably still acting as though nothing was wrong. She said, "Good morning, sweetie," in a slightly too sweet voice that never quite reached her eyes. "Had a good night's sleep?" "Yes," I said, putting my dish down. I didn't feel hungry. "I appreciate you asking." "Good morning," my dad said casually. still immersed in the paper, but there was no warmth, no real interest. It was merely a customary, courteous interaction. He wasn't asking because he cared. The tension thickened the air like smoke as I let the silence settle between us. They had no idea what was going to happen, but I could already sense it intensifying. I had been waiting for this moment. It's time to stop pretending to be someone you're not. You can no longer tolerate their indifference. I hesitated for a long moment, then got up, went to the counter, and picked up the envelope I had put away the night before. It seemed as though there was more weight to the thick linen paper than just words. It carried the consequences, the evidence, and the truth. Returning to the table, I set it in front of them. My mother's eyebrows knitted in perplexity as her eyes shifted down to it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's for you," I said, attempting to seem neutral. "Open it." My dad, intrigued, put the paper down carefully. He still didn't know what was going to happen. With shaky fingers, my mother opened the envelope and took out the contents. The blood drained from her face as she began to read. I could see the change in her expression. I could clearly see the insight and the fear in her eyes. Her face already conveyed the fear, so I didn't need to express it. My father's face hardened as he took in the situation, and he looked at her and then at me. He began to show signs of anger, but I remained unaffected. "No more." My dad said in a quiet, controlled but irate voice, "I don't understand. How long have you been clinging to this?" "Long enough," I responded in a stern yet calm voice. "Enough time for you to understand that the decisions and acts you make have repercussions. You can no longer erase me. You can't erase me the way you used to." With a gentle thump, my mother put the paper down and glanced up at me. "We didn't mean for this to happen," she began, her voice trailing off. "We were only acting in accordance with our best judgment. You must comprehend." "No," I interrupted, saying, "you never got it. You showed no concern. You've always given him preference over me. I was never who you thought I was. But you'll see now. When you treat someone as if they are unimportant, you'll see what happens." For a long time, the room was quiet. My parents were battling feelings of guilt, rage, and shame. They were unsure of how to respond. They had spent years shaping the story and trying to fit me into their mold, but I had had enough. I had reconstructed myself. I had created something significant that wasn't dependent on their affection or acceptance. A few minutes later, my mother's voice was barely audible above the sound of a whisper. "We were mistaken. We are now aware of our mistake. Could we consider taking action?" "No," I cut in. "It's too late. I no longer require anything from you. I have reconciled." My footsteps reverberated in the corridor as I exited the room. I didn't wait for them to stop me. I didn't require their blessing. I had had enough of them. The games were over for me. I no longer needed the family I had worked so hard to gain acceptance with. I experienced an odd sense of peace as I left the house for the last time. It was peace, but not happiness. I wasn't attempting to please anyone for the first time in my life. I wasn't attempting to conform to their ideal of me. I was free. It was my time. It is my time to live solely for myself. The world has changed in ways I never could have imagined in the past few months. Everything fell into place after that day. I didn't have to wave my achievements or shout my truth in front of everybody. The world was already listening, and I didn't even need to speak. The repercussions of the family reunion were truly remarkable. Each wave of phone calls was a pitiful attempt to fix what was irreparable. They attempted to apologize and offer an explanation, but I came to the realization that their efforts were insufficient. This time, my mother's beautifully worded letter felt empty and hollow. It was merely a request for forgiveness and a desperate attempt to alter the course of history. It was not an apology. They were unable to comprehend. They failed to see that the issue was not what I had done or the profession I had developed, but rather how they treated me. They were simply unable to comprehend my decision to leave due to their persistent undermining and favoritism. I continued to go forward, creating the life I had always envisioned. I ignored the fake excuses and the deserted house. I concentrated on the individuals who truly cared about me, the new endeavors, and the new undertakings. I contacted those who had always valued me and knew my feelings and struggles. Just when I thought everything was complete, I received a note. It came from someone I had all but forgotten about, not from them. They were someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a buddy and an old coworker. However, their words stayed with me. "I'm so proud of you," they wrote. "I recall the time you doubted yourself. You've accomplished something incredible, and you're stronger than you realize. You've demonstrated to me that it's acceptable to leave behind what is causing you pain and start something new. Continue." I was more moved by that message than by any apology or family get together. I required a reminder that my actions were solely for my benefit. I did this for myself. And at last, I had transformed into the person I was destined to be. I saw my family disintegrate in unexpected ways as the months went by. With each desperate phone call, my mother's voice grew weaker. They had established their reputation on lies, and my father was still clinging to the remains of that reputation. My sibling? I noticed that he never again solicited me for money, but he continued to write mysterious remarks on Instagram about mental health. My silence, not their financial ruin or reputation loss, was the most captivating part. I refrained from boasting. I didn't say anything in public. I simply carried on with my life, continued to build, and patiently waited. I understood that at times, silence can have a greater impact than words. They continued to send me texts, messages, and letters. It didn't matter, though. I was no longer in need of their approval. I had created my own life, one that was independent of them and their standards. I owed no one an explanation. It was mine. I received an invitation to a wedding a year later. The occasion was a friend's wedding. It was not a celebration of a relative or a romantic relationship. Simply put, they had recognized me for who I was, not for the mistakes they expected me to make. At the reception, I was mingling with people who genuinely cared when someone approached me and asked, "Are you the t-shirt guy?" They had heard about my stance, seen the courage in it, and viewed the viral tale. I chuckled. "Yeah, that's me," I said, oblivious to the passing of time. What this person said next was memorable to me. "I also left my family because of your story. Before I witnessed what you accomplished, I didn't believe it was possible. And there it was. It was the first time I felt truly validated by someone who recognized the value of stepping back. It was motivated by survival rather than resentment or rage. It wasn't self-centered. It was essential. And I realized for the first time in my life that leaving didn't entail any losses. Gaining everything was the goal. I'm still unsure about their current opinion of me. I no longer care. I'm not scared of the truth since it will eventually come out. Even though my family will never fully comprehend the extent of what they did to me, I am aware that I am free. And that was ultimately more valuable than anything they could provide. What do you think then? Was it the correct decision to leave relatives behind? Have you ever faced a difficult decision similar to this? Please share your ideas in the comments section below. Please let me know if you've ever felt limited by others' expectations, or if you've taken a similar action in your life. For more inspiring stories, click the bell, like, and subscribe. Occasionally, the best thing to do is to step away from what's holding you back. Let's discuss it.